The stone is cool beneath your fingers, not the polished marble of a palace, not the cut ashlar of a temple wall, but rough, local limestone, the kind a man would chisel with his own hands in the hill country of Lower Galilee, shaping the living rock itself into walls, into shelves, into the bones of a home where children would be born, and bread would be broken, and prayers would rise like smoke through a low doorway into the pale morning sky. Beneath the Sisters of Nazareth convent, in a space most pilgrims never see, archaeologists uncovered exactly this: a house carved directly into bedrock, with a cistern, storage niches, and a small courtyard, dated firmly to the 1st century. And the question it raises is the kind that makes your hands tremble. Is this where he grew up? Is this the room where the Word made flesh learned to walk? Ken Darke, the British archaeologist who led the excavation between 2006 and 2010, was careful with his language. He called it a strong candidate. The location matched, the construction date matched, and then there was the veneration evidence. Later generations had treated this place as sacred, building over it, protecting it, marking it as something that mattered long before anyone with a trowel and a grid square arrived. The stones remembered what the centuries had tried to bury. But here is what strikes you when you stand in a space like that, when you crouch beneath a lintel that hasn't moved in 2,000 years. It is small, breathtakingly, almost painfully small. The God who flung the stars across the void and called the oceans into their basins grew up in a space you could cross in 6 steps. First-century Galilean houses averaged 40 to 50 square meters. That is roughly 430 to 540 square feet for families of 6 to 10 people. The math is unforgiving. Each person had 5 to 7 square meters of living space. A modern prison cell in the United States averages 7 to 8 square meters. The Son of God was raised in quarters tighter than what we give to those we punish, and he never once described it as deprivation. He described it as home. We need to go inside. Forget everything you know about houses. Forget hallways. Forget separate bedrooms. Forget the kitchen down the hall, the bathroom behind a locked door, the closet where you hang 30 garments you rotate through a season. Forget all of it. Because when you step through the doorway of a first-century Galilean home, and you will have to duck to do it, because those doorways measured only 4 to 5 feet high and barely wide enough to turn your shoulders through, you enter a single room. One room, that is the house. That is the... Jesus confirmed this himself, and most people read right past it. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 15, he says, "Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." The word he uses is oikia, the house, the whole dwelling, and the phrase that follows, everyone in it, tells you everything. One lamp, one room, everyone illuminated by a single flame because there was nowhere else to be. And that flame, let me tell you about that flame, because it changes the way you read your Bible at night. The Herodian-era oil lamps found across Galilee are small enough to cup in your palm. They held 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil. They burned for 2 to 4 hours before they needed refilling, and they produced roughly 10 to 15 lumens of light. A single modern 60-watt bulb produces about 800 lumens, which means the home where Jesus ate dinner, where Mary sang psalms, where Joseph taught his son to shape wood with a hand adze, was 50 to 80 times darker than your living room with one light on. When the woman in Luke chapter 15 loses a coin, 1 drachma, a full day's wage, she lights a lamp and sweeps the house. We read that as a parable about God's relentless search for the lost, and it is, but it is also a literal description of domestic reality. She needs a lamp to search her own home in the middle of the day because the windows, if she had them at all, were openings barely 8 to 16 inches across. set high in the walls to keep out cold and intruders. Almost no light entered. The archaeological deposits found inside these houses are consistently darker in soil color than what is found in the courtyards just outside. The dividing line between light and shadow was the doorway. Inside was darkness. Outside was the world. And that is the world Jesus was describing when he said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, "Go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." The word he uses is not bedroom. The Greek is tamion, and it means the inner room, the storeroom, the small windowless chamber at the back of the house where a family kept its food and its few valuables. The pantry. Jesus is literally telling you to pray in your pantry. Because in a house with one room and 6 to 10 people and animals sharing the floor, the storeroom is the only place on earth where you can be alone with God. That changes the instruction, doesn't it? He is not prescribing a prayer routine. He is acknowledging with the tenderness of someone who lived it that privacy is almost impossible for you. And then telling you that God meets you in the smallest, darkest, most hidden corner you can find. The pantry is enough. The closet is enough. The car in the parking lot with the engine off is enough. God does not need a cathedral. He needs a closed door and a willing heart. Now come deeper into the room. Your eyes are adjusting. You can see the floor, packed earth, hard and smooth from years of bare feet and broom strokes. But the floor is not level. There is a step, a raised platform of about 12 to 20 inches running along the back portion of the room. This is where the family lives. They eat here, they work here, they sleep here, all of them together, on mats unrolled across the stone. The lower section, below that step, is for the animals. This is not poverty. This is standard design across Galilee, confirmed at Nazareth, at Capernaum, at Josaphat. The animals were brought inside at night, the ox, the donkey, a few goats, and they occupied the lower floor, separated from the family sometimes by a rough stone curb and sometimes by nothing at all. In winter, when the temperature inside these stone houses dropped to 45 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the body heat from 6 to 8 family members and 2 or 3 animals raised the temperature by an estimated 5 to 9 degrees. The animals were not just an economic asset, they were a heating system. You slept above them, and their warmth rose into your blankets and your bones. And right here, embedded in the lower floor, you would find the manger, the fatten, the same word Luke uses in chapter 2, verse 7, for where Mary laid her newborn son. Excavated stone mangers from first-century sites measure roughly 2 to 3 feet long, a foot to 16 inches wide, and 8 to 12 inches deep, roughly the size of a modern infant bassinet. The manger was not an act of desperation. It was a surprisingly practical cradle, carved from the same stone as the house itself, shaped by hands that had fed animals from it for years. The King of Kings laid in the same trough where the ox had eaten that morning, divinity resting where the beasts fed. And if you do not feel the weight of that, read it again, slower. Step outside now, into the courtyard. This is where life actually happens. The courtyard is shared between 2, 3, sometimes 4 houses clustered together, extended family, usually, grandparents and married children building against each other's walls until the village looks, from above, like a honeycomb of stone. And in this shared outdoor space you find the kitchen, not inside the house. The house is for sleeping, for storage, for shelter from rain. The cooking happens here, in the open air, around a taboon oven. A dome of clay roughly 2 feet across and 18 inches high, radiating heat that would make the enclosed house unbearable. Rabbinic law was precise about this. The Mishnah in Bava Batra required that bread ovens be placed a minimum of 3 handbreadths from a neighbor's wall because of fire risk. Cooking was communal, visible, shared. The smell of bread baking was not something that drifted from behind a closed kitchen door. It filled the courtyard, the street, the air between houses. And beside the oven, you would find the grinding stones. Basalt, heavy, the upper stone alone weighing 30 to 50 pounds. Women ground grain daily, 1 to 2 hours before dawn, producing enough flour for the day's bread. The sound was rhythmic, constant, so universal across every village in the land that when the prophet Jeremiah wanted to describe total desolation, the image he reached for was this: I will banish from them the sound of the millstone. When the grinding stops, life has ended. Inside the house, meanwhile, you would hear a different rhythm, the clack of a loom. Loom weights and spindle whirls appear in virtually every excavated domestic space across Galilee. Textile production happened at home, on the raised platform, while children played around the frame and an oil lamp flickered from its niche in the wall. The house was a factory, a bedroom, a dining room, a barn, and a chapel. All in one room, all at once, all the time. I want you to pause here and feel something. We live in houses with rooms we do not enter for days. We have guest bedrooms no guest has slept in for months. We have garages full of objects we have forgotten we own. And Jesus grew up in a world where every square foot served 3 purposes, where privacy was a luxury available only in a dark storeroom, where the sound of your brother breathing was the last thing you heard before sleep and the first thing you heard at waking. He knew what it was to live pressed against other people. He knew the friction of it, the tenderness of it, the impossibility of hiding anything from anyone. When he later said, "Love one another," he was not speaking from a private office. He was speaking from a room where love was not optional, because distance was not possible. Now look up. Above you, accessible by an external stone staircase built against the outer wall, steps barely 2 feet wide, carved from local fieldstone without mortar, held together by gravity and the skill of the builder, is the roof. The roof is not a roof. The roof is a room. It is the second floor, the guest bedroom, the prayer closet, the summer sleeping quarters, the food drying platform, the public announcement stage, and the place where, in the cool of the evening, a man could sit and watch the sun drop behind the hills of Galilee and speak quietly with God. When Peter went up to the roof to pray at noon, as recorded in Acts chapter 10, verse 9, he was following a practice as old as the prophets. When Samuel spoke with Saul on the roof, in 1 Samuel chapter 9, the roof was already ancient as a living space. When the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings chapter 4 built a small upper room for the prophet Elisha, furnishing it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lampstand, she was providing what her culture considered a fully furnished guest room. 4 items. That was luxury, and the Mosaic law itself recognized the roof as living space. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 8. When you build a new house, make a parapet around your roof so that you do not bring the guilt of bloodshed on your house if anyone falls from the roof. This is a building code, a divinely mandated safety regulation, because people were up there constantly, sleeping, working, praying, eating, arguing. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 9 puts it with devastating honesty. Better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. That is not just a proverb. Archaeological evidence shows small lean-to structures built on roof edges. A man could and did move to the corner of his roof and sleep there rather than endure conflict in the room below. The ancient equivalent of sleeping on the couch, except vertical. But here is what most people miss about the roof, and it will change how you read one of the most dramatic scenes in the Gospels. The roof of a Galilean house was not made of tiles. It was not solid. It was constructed of wooden beams laid across the stone walls, overlaid with branches, then reeds, then packed mud and clay, built up to a thickness of about 12 to 18 inches. It was sturdy enough to walk on, to sleep on, to dry figs and flax on. But it could be broken. In Mark chapter 2, verse 4, when the four friends bring the paralyzed man to Jesus, the house is so crowded they cannot get through the door. So they go up the external staircase onto the roof and they begin to dig. The Greek text is extraordinary. Mark says they apestagassen ten stegen, they unroofed the roof. The word implies tearing, ripping, pulling apart layer after layer. Branches snapping, reeds tearing, packed clay crumbling, the debris falling through onto the heads of everyone below, onto the heads of the Pharisees who had come to evaluate this teacher from Nazareth, onto the head of Jesus himself, dust in his hair, clay on his shoulders, daylight breaking through the ceiling in a widening wound of sky, while four men, gasping with effort, cleared a hole large enough to lower their friend on his mat down into the presence of the only one who could heal him. Luke, writing for a Greek and Roman audience who would not understand mud and branch roofing, uses a different word, keramon, tiles, translating the physical reality into something his readers could picture. This is not a contradiction. This is a skilled author knowing his audience. Mark describes what happened. Luke describes it in terms his readers could see. And both of them are telling you the same astonishing thing. These men destroyed someone's house to reach Jesus. They tore apart a roof that would take days to repair. They ruined property. They made a spectacle. They rained dirt and debris on religious leaders who had come to judge. And Jesus looked up through the hole they had made, through the ragged opening where sky now poured in. And the text says he saw their faith. Not the paralyzed man's faith, their faith. The faith of the men on the roof with dirt under their fingernails and sweat running down their faces. He measured their belief by the damage they were willing to do. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been desperate enough to tear through a roof? Have you ever loved someone enough to make a mess, to break what was proper, to embarrass yourself in front of people who would judge you because getting that person to Jesus was the only thing that mattered? Come back inside, sit on the raised platform where the family gathers at evening, feel the stone beneath you, still holding the warmth of the day. The oil lamp is lit, that small, fragile flame cupped in clay, pushing back the darkness just enough to see the faces of the people you love. The animals shift and breathe below you. Someone is nursing an infant, someone is mending a net. The bread from the courtyard oven is still warm, torn into pieces, passed from hand to hand. There is no running water. The family's water comes from a cistern carved into the bedrock beneath or beside the house, a plastered reservoir holding anywhere from 500 to 4,000 gallons, fed by channels that collect rain from the roof and courtyard during the October to April rainy season. When the rains end, what you have is what you have. Every cup is counted. Every drop is a decision. There is no toilet inside the house. Deuteronomy chapter 23 commanded that latrines be located outside the settlement. At Qumran, the communal facilities were positioned nearly half a mile from the living quarters. A walk of 10 minutes in the dark, in the cold, in the rain, for what we accomplish in 30 seconds behind a locked bathroom door. The sheer physicality of ancient life is almost impossible for us to absorb. Every basic human need required effort, exposure, and vulnerability. And yet they stored something in those houses that we, with all our space and light and plumbing, often cannot find room for. They stored presence. In Psalm 128, verse 3, the poet writes, "Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house." The Hebrew is beyarkate beteka, literally, in the innermost parts of your house. This is the recessed rear section of that single room where the woman worked and managed the household, grinding, weaving, kneading, nursing, hidden from the street, sheltered from the public gaze, but forming the functional core of everything the family was. The house radiated outward from her labor. The family was fed by her hands, and the poet calls her a vine, something alive, growing, fruitful, rooted in the innermost place. The stone vessels on the shelf beside her tell their own story. Unlike pottery, stone could not contract ritual impurity according to rabbinic law. The Mishnah in Kelim is explicit, and so Jewish households across Galilee and Judea used mass-produced stone cups and jars for everyday drinking and storage, a uniquely Jewish practice that archaeologists now use as a signature to identify ethnically Jewish settlements. When you pick up a stone cup from a first-century Galilean house, you are holding a statement of identity, a family that said, even in the humblest details of daily life, we belong to the God of Israel. We keep his commandments even in what we drink from. At Capernaum, Virgilio Corbo's excavations between 1968 and 1986 uncovered a cluster of first-century basalt houses built around shared courtyards. The Insula Sacra. One room in particular showed something remarkable. Its walls had been plastered over and covered with graffiti, Christian graffiti, names, prayers, invocations, scratched into the plaster by hands that trembled with devotion. This room had been converted into a house church as early as the middle of the 1st century, within decades of the resurrection. It was identified by those earliest believers as the House of Peter, the house where Jesus stayed when he was in Capernaum, the house where, in a single room no larger than a modern garage, the sick were brought to the door and healed while the whole city gathered outside. Peter's house. I want you to hold that phrase. A fisherman's house, basalt walls, packed earth floor, one room, a low doorway you could not walk through without bowing your head. And the Son of God chose it as his base of operations. Not the governor's palace, not the high priest's mansion, not even the synagogue, though he taught there too. He chose a fisherman's house, a room where the nets hung from the ceiling beams and the smell of the lake never quite left the walls. This is the architecture of the Incarnation. God did not enter the world through a palace gate. He entered through a doorway so low that even entering required an act of humility. He slept on a platform above animals. He ate bread torn from a common loaf. He prayed in a storeroom. He taught in rooms lit by a single flame that you could hold in one hand. And when he said, "What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs." As Matthew records in chapter 10, verse 27, he was describing the exact acoustics of his own daily life. The whisper of a teacher in a dark room, the shout from a rooftop over narrow streets, the intimate and the public, connected by a stone staircase on the outside of a wall. The rooftops were the public address system of the ancient village. Elevated above the tight streets, a voice from the roof carried across the clustered houses below. What was secret inside became proclamation above, and Jesus embedded this architecture into his theology. Truth moves upward, from the hidden room to the open sky, from the whisper to the shout, from the storeroom where you prayed alone to the roof where you declare what God has done. I think about the burnt house, excavated in Jerusalem's Jewish quarter, dating to the Roman destruction of 70 AD. It preserved a complete domestic interior, stone tables, ritual baths, measuring cups, stone vessels. And beneath the collapsed rubble, they found a woman's arm bone, just the arm, reaching toward the doorway. A frozen moment from the last hours of Jerusalem, when the flames consumed the city and a woman in her own home reached for the door and did not make it. The house that had been her shelter became her tomb, and everything she had stored on those shelves, everything she had ground and baked and woven and prayed over in that single room, all of it burned. Jesus had seen it coming. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 17, he had said, "Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house." The urgency of that instruction only makes sense when you understand the architecture. Someone on the roof doing ordinary things, drying food, sleeping, praying, would have to descend the external staircase, duck through the low doorway, gather belongings, come back out, climb the stairs again. Jesus says, "Don't. jump from roof to roof. The things inside are not worth your life. Your life is worth more than your house, and your life is worth more than his. That is what the architecture finally teaches, if you let it. The God who made the galaxies folded himself into 40 square meters. He shared a sleeping platform with his family. He breathed the same air as the animals below. He washed in water rationed from a cistern. He dressed in 2 garments, an inner tunic and an outer cloak, and when he sent his disciples out, he told them to carry only one. He read scripture by a light that barely reached the corners of the room, and he called that room, with its darkness and its closeness and its smell of bread and animals and earth, he called it home. He chose the smallest space so that no one would ever believe God was too large for theirs. Think about your own home tonight, the rooms you walk through without gratitude, the light you flip on without wonder, the water that flows when you turn a handle, the door you close when you need to be alone. Every one of those things would have been miraculous to the family in that house in Nazareth. Every one of those things is a grace you have received so constantly that you have forgotten it is grace at all. But think also about what that house in Nazareth had that yours might not. Think about the closeness, the faces you could not avoid, the love that had no room to hide. Think about a family so pressed together that every prayer was overheard, every tear was witnessed, every act of tenderness was performed in full view of everyone. Think about a father teaching his son to shape wood in a room so small that their shoulders touched. Think about a mother singing a psalm while she kneaded dough, and her voice filling the entire house, because there was nowhere in that house her voice could not reach. One lamp, one room, one family, and God in the middle of it, growing. The excavation beneath the Sisters of Nazareth convent is quiet now. The tourists rarely come this far. The stones sit in their ancient silence, the cistern dry, the niches empty, the courtyard still. But the room remembers. Stone always remembers. And if you were to kneel there, in the half-darkness, on the same bedrock that a boy from Nazareth once knelt on to say his evening prayers, you would understand something that no cathedral, no matter how vast, could ever teach you. God does not need space. God needs welcome, and the door he enters through is always, always low enough to require you to bow. If this journey through the houses of Scripture has opened something in you, if you have seen the ancient world more clearly and felt the presence of God more closely in the ordinary walls of your own life, then walk this road with us. There is so much more to uncover, so many rooms in Scripture we have never truly entered. Subscribe, and we will go together, lamp in hand, through every doorway the Bible holds open for us. The flame is small, but it is enough. It has always been enough.